Scotland never disappoints, with a wild and wonderful landscape dominating much of its 31,000 square miles. It's easy on the eye, drawing tourists by the coachload, but for those on a tighter schedule, its impact can be exhausting. Beyond the major population clusters of the central lowlands, communities become smaller and more scattered. Not natural territory for railway companies, whose shareholders didn't invest for altruistic purposes, they sought financial return. And yet a railway map from the 19th century tells its own story. Lines crisscrossed the country, reaching out to remote village and distant town. It was intrepid engineers who drove them there, making the improbable possible, as only engineers can. Post-war economics and social change reshaped the network, trimming most of the branches. But some history can't easily be deleted. Even in the most unlikely places, dramatic structures still dress the set. Few closures achieved more notoriety than that of the cross-border Westerly Line, which, despite vigorous opposition, became a victim of the railway's retrenchment in January 1969. It climbed the southern uplands to create a 98-mile connection between Edinburgh and Carlisle. 3 miles north of Withrop Tunnel, arguably the line's greatest engineering feat, was another that ran it close second, Shankend Viaduct, set in a bleak and formidable landscape. Both were engineered by John Furness Tone and formed part of the most demanding works contract, valued at £72,000 and signed by William Ritson in August 1859. More than a year went by before attention turned to the viaduct, agreement eventually being reached for a quarry to be established nearby as a source for the stone. 2 hideous winters further impeded progress, but that didn't deter inquisitive townsfolk from Hawick, 7 miles away by road, visiting regularly on sightseeing tours. Confronting them must have been a scene of spectacular industry, as many hands remodelled the scenery. Hampering the contractor's efforts to claw back lost time was a scarcity of skilled masons. Ritson's agent visited Peebles, hoping to entice its busy civic workforce to spend 6 months at Shankend, offering generous rates of £2 per week. Nobody was tempted, unsurprisingly. And then there was the curious tale of Abigail Hall, a navvy's wife who eloped with a driver known as Wild Harry, taking possessions and £70 of marital savings with her. The enraged husband hired a gig and set off in pursuit, accompanied by 2 officers from the county police. They encountered the runaways on the road to Jedburgh, and a fiery confrontation ensued before the pair were taken into custody. Goods trains first tested Shankend Viaduct on the 23rd of June 1862. One span having overcome the signs of distress it was showing just a few weeks earlier. Such problems persisted throughout its operational life, prompting a hodgepodge of repairs as weather and traffic loading took their toll. Close up, the structure today looks rather scruffy. Step back though, and a peculiar harmony reveals itself. This is a viaduct very much at home, against an often hostile backdrop. Welcome to the middle of nowhere. To the west, 35 miles from here, is Portpatrick, on the Scottish side of the shortest sea crossing to Ireland. Historically, the place was thriving. Then the railway came to North Wales and most of the all-important Irish mail traffic diverted via Holyhead. That was 1850. To seize back the initiative, a scheme was developed to drive a line 80 miles across country, linking Portpatrick to rail routes heading south. It was ambitious, costly, and not entirely competitive. Giving Ribble Head a run for its money in terms of isolation was the engineering centrepiece, a 20-span viaduct over Bigwater of Fleet, the nearest settlement 8 miles away. Designed by brothers Benjamin and Edward Blythe, its construction was encompassed within the 11.5-mile Loch Skerrow contract, awarded to Waddell & McNaughton, Glasgow-based contractors, for the sum of £95,841. Stipulated was completion of the work by the 1st of September 1860, but the last arch wasn't turned until the 8th of September, and another winter had almost passed before Captain Tyler fulfilled his inspection duties for the Board of Trade. Viewed from the 21st century, it's impossible to imagine what life must have been like here without the comforts we all take for granted. For 20-odd months, the workforce lodged in a collection of wooden shacks nearby, making their own entertainment. Danger lived alongside them, although its company was often a function of their own recklessness. One boy, employed on a travelling crane, fell 80 feet when he tried to jump into a bucket being lowered to the ground. He missed, but miraculously landed on a gravel bank and sustained just 2 broken ribs. In 1876, a Galloway rambler expressed his admiration at an exceedingly handsome and airy granite structure. It didn't stay that way though. The viaduct proved problematic and underwent heavy repair as early as 1912. By 1924, cracks were starting to appear, resulting in the arches being strapped to prevent movement of the spandrels, whilst the piers were encased in brick. It's unsightly, but pragmatic. Local traffic was predictably light, however the line was used heavily during both World Wars, hence that cracking, and it remained an important route thereafter for cattle and troop trains. The growth in road transport did for it though, prompting a decline through the 1950s that ultimately brought the curtain down in June 1965. Cared for now by railway paths, this ugly duckling still sits comfortably in its landscape. That it does so is largely thanks to officialdom denying permission for it to suffer the same fate as its lesser neighbour over Littlewater of Fleet, which an army explosives exercise obliterated. Through the summer of 1863, a small shantytown emerged on the south bank of the River Tweed as contractor John Lawton geared up to tackle a severe structural challenge. It had been set for him by Charles Jopp, engineer for the Berwickshire Railway, as part of the company's dry grange contract, connecting the Westerly Line to Earlston, 3 miles away. The big ticket attraction was Leaderfoot Viaduct, built in brick and red sandstone. Its 19 arches still stride confidently across the valley. Peaceful today, but not 150-odd years ago. Overcoming trial and tribulation demanded spirited perseverance. Foundations for the river piers proved difficult to establish, causing delay to the programme. An epidemic of gastric fever swept through the navvy encampment. 12-foot-high floods threatened to wash the piers and service bridge away. And then there were the familiar faces of Dr. Brown and Dr. Smith from Melrose, who attended regularly to the casualties of misfortune. George Taylor struck on the head when rubble fell from a skip. Charles Mann crushed by a beam after a securing rope was severed. A brakesman named Robertson, whose leg had to be amputated after it was run over by a wagon. It was an appalling catalogue. But things eventually came together, as they always did. On the 15th of September 1865, 60 men, amongst them John Learmont, the resident engineer, clambered onto ballast wagons for a first ever run over the viaduct. 2 weeks later, it was thrown open to the public, hundreds of spruced up locals converging above the Tweed at 130 feet. It must have been a spectacle in full colour. The viaduct had not finished causing trouble though. Track settlement was recorded shortly after it opened, then cracks developed in 2 piers at the south end, blame being apportioned on the use of stockpiled stone rather than better quality material from the contractor's quarry at Greenlaw. 40 men hastily erected substantial buttresses around the offending piers, the company chairman expressing regret that so splendid a piece of architecture in bridge building should be disfigured with large, rude-looking supports. In 1991, 26 years after the final train visited, the viaduct's appearance improved markedly when a wholesale refurbishment was begun. What never came to fruition were plans to place 2 carriages on it, one of them hosting a tea room. How British would that have been? It was a cause of much local dismay that the railway revolution had bypassed the fishing villages along the Moray Firth coast, such were the meagre returns on offer. Circumstances changed though in 1880, thanks to a major investment in harbour facilities at Buckie. This convinced the Great North of Scotland Railway to push forward with a 25-mile line connecting Portsoy to Elgin. The central part of the route proved heavy going, involving viaducts at Cullen and a crossing of the Spey less than a mile inland from the sea. Engineer Patrick Barnett intended to erect separate bridges here over the river's 3 channels, but the Duke of Richmond and Gordon objected due to the impact this would have on his salmon fishing rights. Instead, the Spey would be confined to a central channel, crossed by a 368-foot bowstring span, the longest Scotland had ever seen. Approach viaducts on either side would come into their own during times of flood. Theory and reality don't always meet, particularly when nature leads the opposition. The original stonework contractor walked away, defeated by the task of digging foundations for the piers. The Spey posed even bigger problems, resisting all attempts to change its course, despite 50,000 cubic yards of material being excavated to create a new channel extending a mile upstream. Then 300 navvies went on the rampage, furious at their employer's refusal to pay an extra 4p an hour for their efforts. Rioting in nearby Garmouth brought broken limbs and a vicious attack on one of the company's timekeepers. A foreman's intervention probably saved his life. Progress with the bridge spans ran rather more smoothly, under the direction of Blakey brothers from Aberdeen, the Great North's long-standing collaborators. The logistics were daunting though, horse and cart having to transport tons of ironwork to site from the nearest railway station, 5 miles away. That said, the job did benefit from considerable mechanisation, just 40 men were needed. Especially noteworthy was a machine that could fix 900 rivets in a day. The last one was inserted ceremonially, using very manual means, by the site's top brass on the 22nd of October 1885. The structure's 588 tons of ironwork had been erected in just 10 months. The line along the Moray coast survived until May 1968. But the viaduct's anticipated dismantling never materialised, and on the 3rd of July 1981 it became part of the Speyside Way. The route is blessed with fabulous vistas. None, though, is more striking than the one from the riverbank. Looking back at the monument, engineer Barnett didn't actually want to build. Taming nature is a tricky business, as Spey Viaduct demonstrates only too well. There was, though, much to admire in man's willingness to put up a fight, often for very marginal gain. Ambition, tenacity, resourcefulness, courage, characteristics we can all aspire to, and found in abundance amongst Scotland's railway engineers. The country's topography asked tough questions of them. Evidence of their answers is still slung over ravines, navigating harsh landscapes, and sunk into riverbeds. There is great glory in these victories, and we shouldn't underestimate the magnitude of them.